We're about to begin. Please welcome to the stage Oberlin College President Marvin Krislov.
Thank you. Thank you and good evening, and welcome to this exciting conversation as part of the conference entitled After Fossil Fuels, the Next Economy. I want to begin by thanking our wonderful sponsors and partners, and also paying a special tribute to David Orr, Professor David Orr, who organized this conference. Tom Steyer is a business and financial leader, a philanthropist, and an environmentalist who believes we have a moral responsibility to give back and to help ensure that every family shares the benefits of economic opportunity, education, and a healthy climate. After founding and running a successful hedge fund in California, he left to work full-time on nonprofit and advocacy efforts. He now serves as president of NextGen Climate, an organization he founded in 2013 to prevent climate disaster and promote prosperity for Save Lives California, the coalition to prevent teen smoking and fund cancer research. With his wife, Kat Taylor, Tom Steyer has pledged to contribute most of their wealth to charitable causes during their lifetimes. They founded Beneficial State Bank in Oakland, a nonprofit community bank that provides loans to people and small businesses that shut out by traditional banking system. He was born in Manhattan. He is a summa cum laude graduate of Yale University with majors in economics and political science. He received his MBA from Stanford Business School and has served on that university's board of trustees. Please join me in welcoming Tom Steyer. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you very much for having me here. It is wonderful to be at Oberlin and to see one of the wisest people in the world, my good friend David Orr. We are here to talk about the next economy, the fossil-free economy. But let's be clear. We are in a race with Mother Nature over climate change, and it's a race that we can't afford to lose. We have the tools to win. The question is, do we have the will to win? Let me take a step back and set the scene for you. There's no question in my mind that the solutions to climate change are within reach. We have the tools we need to move America forward. On every score, the US has moved farther and faster since 2012 than anyone expected. We have been running hard. The cost curves of clean energy versus fossil fuels are crossing. Business attitudes have changed, public opinion has moved, and we've made enormous strides from a policy perspective. Let's start with the cost curves. For much of the United States, wind energy creates the cheapest source of electricity, with solar energy not far behind. The US installed more wind energy in the fourth quarter of 2015 than in all of 2014. In 2015, solar added jobs 12 times faster than the overall economy. We aren't asking if anymore. We will fuel a strong economy by creating a healthy environment. And the businesses in America have taken note. There's a false belief that American businesses don't support action on climate change. But by and large, we found the opposite to be true. The majority of American businesses know we can no longer afford not to act, and they see a huge opportunity in transitioning to clean energy. Last year, 154 major American corporations signed on to support action on climate change in advance of the Paris Agreement. And that agreement constitutes a strong step forward toward a low-carbon, sustainable future. The 6 largest banking institutions in the US also called for a strong agreement in Paris, with policies that account for the full cost of carbon. Businesses in Ohio and across the Midwest are leading the way on climate and clean energy. Cargill, Schneider Electric, Johnson Controls, there's a long list of major American companies that are not on the coast. Meanwhile, historically conservative icons have moved. Our military leaders are sending a clear message to our politicians that climate change has huge implications for national security, threatening to create huge numbers of climate refugees and to destabilize the world. Religious leaders like Pope Francis are making a powerful moral case for protecting our common home and looking after our fellow humans. And we can't forget that a majority of Americans want their leaders to take action on climate change and want to accelerate our transition to clean energy. A recent poll of Republican voters and conservative independents here in Ohio found overwhelming support for clean energy, with 72% wanting their candidates to support energy efficiency and clean energy policies. Young people, a critical group in 2016, overwhelmingly want our leaders to go big on climate and clean energy, with 80% preferring candidates who offer clean energy solutions. In fact, our polling internally has 91% of millennials, of people under 35, wanting to transition to 100% clean energy, and 81% of millennials saying that clean air and water is a high priority to them. That's why our organization, NextGen Climate, launched one of the biggest youth voter programs in electoral history this year, operating on almost 400 campuses, including 50 right here in Ohio. In 2016, we think these efforts are more important than ever. It is increasingly obvious that climate change is the challenge of our generation. And we are doing significantly better than anyone predicted 4 years ago in combating it. But as I said to begin with, it's a race. And Mother Nature follows the laws of physics. 2015 was the hottest year ever by the biggest margin ever. August 2016 was the 16th straight month of record-breaking heat, the hottest month recorded of that month for the 16th time in a row. For the 8th consecutive year, extreme weather has cost US taxpayers over $10 billion. I think the easiest way to think about how nature's moving is to know that people look at 2 degrees Celsius, 3.6 degrees Fahrenheit, as catastrophic. We've moved 1 degree in 215 years. Last year, we moved 12 hundredths of a degree. This year, we look to be moving about 14 or 15 hundredths of a degree. So over 214 years, we moved 1 degree. In the last 2 years, we've moved 1/4 of a degree. We're getting hotter much faster. Mother Nature isn't waiting around. From a practical standpoint, these accelerated impacts are forcing us to examine our timelines and ask, are we doing enough quickly enough? And perhaps more importantly, are we electing leaders who are prepared to take swift and decisive action to avert the worst impacts of climate change? To his credit, President Obama views clean energy as a legacy issue. He was a global leader in the Paris Agreement, and he's continued that global leadership in advance of the Montreal Protocol meetings taking place in Rwanda this coming week. He's made historic agreements with India and China. He rejected the Keystone XL pipeline. He extended the tax credits for wind and solar. It's a long list. Even as the Supreme Court is stalled in implementation, he deserves an enormous amount of credit for championing the Clean Power Plan. But even as the president leads on climate from the White House, the gridlock of entrenched interests in Congress has frozen much of our progress at the national level. And the political landscape in 2017 has the potential to be even bleaker. On climate and clean energy, government sets the framework, and the private sector uses that framework to do what it does best, which is to innovate, to create, and to drive global progress. It has never been more critical that we get the framework right. You have seen this story play out here in Ohio. In 2008, your state passed an achievable renewable portfolio standard, an energy efficiency resource standard, and amazing things happened. Between 2009 and 2013, Ohio attracted $1.3 billion in private renewable energy investment. And while Ohio saw approximately $750 million in wind and solar investment in 2012, the landscape changed dramatically when the legislature passed a bill freezing those standards in 2014. Following the freeze, solar investment in Ohio dropped below $25 million in 2015, and wind development dropped to zero. The framework really matters. And on a national scale, the framework that we choose in 2017 and on will have implications for generations to come. The 2016 election isn't just about the old battles between the right and the left. Those battles, however loud and passionate and hard-fought, habitually led to elegant and practical solutions. We are not a quiet people, but we do face up to our problems together and solve them. That's what Americans have done for over 200 years. That's who Americans are. But in 2016, we're in a battle for the future. The decisions we make today will affect generations for 50, 100, and more years. And the refusal to face up to the challenge of our times is flat out wrong. It's a morally and intellectually bankrupt position. Our task can be summarized very simply. It's to clean up electricity generation, it's to electrify everything, and it's to increase our energy efficiency dramatically. If we do that in a way that creates good-paying jobs throughout our communities and cleans our air and water, we will be successful. Embedded in the word progressive is the idea of looking to the future, to moving our country forward with progress. And it's fitting that we're here at Oberlin this week, because this school is famous for its progressive history. For it's fitting that we're at a gathering convened by someone who's made looking to our planet's future his life's work, David Orr. His leadership and Oberlin's leadership could not be more critical for Ohio's clean energy future. Progress is the only option. As I said, Mother Nature is not waiting around. And the urgency of this crisis cannot be overstated, but neither can America's capabilities. We never shirk the big questions. We never sacrifice the interests of our neighbors for the sake of our personal gain. We do face up to the world's greatest challenges. We do come together to solve them. In just over a month, America will have the chance to solidify our leadership once more and continue the fight for progress. The stakes are extremely high, but we will rise to the occasion. As the president said, we will live lives of meaning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tom. And now to introduce our next amazing speaker is Professor A.G. Miller, professor in the Department of Religious Studies at Oberlin College.
President Krisloff, honored guests, and participants in this conference, it is my pleasure to introduce to you the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III. Reverend Moss serves as the senior pastor at Trinity United Church of Christ on the south side of Chicago. Reverend Moss is no stranger to Northeast Ohio, as he was raised in the Cleveland area by his parents, Edwina and Otis Moss Jr. He graduated from Shaker Heights High School. He is a Morehouse man, graduate of Morehouse College in 1992, as did his father before him. He completed his Master of Divinity degree at Yale University, at Yale Divinity School in 1995, and earned a Doctor of Divinity in 2012 from the Chicago Theological Seminary. He was ordained in 1995 by his father, the Reverend Otis Moss Jr., at his home church, Olivet Institutional Baptist Church. He has served as senior pastor of 2 historic black churches, Tabernacle Baptist Church in Augusta, Georgia, and Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago. Reverend Moss was raised, trained, and has served in the best of the progressive black church tradition. His father, Reverend Otis Moss Jr., served with Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. On the Southern Christian Leadership Conference Board. His father also served as the senior pastor at Olivet Institutional Church in Cleveland, where even after his retirement, he continues to be recognized as one of America's greatest preachers and as a nationally sought-after civil rights and human rights leader. Dr. Moss III has studied with the beloved and the late Dr. Vincent Harding, one of my mentors, internationally renowned progressive black church historian par excellence, and a confidant of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and he was committed to peace, civil, and human rights as well. Reverend Moss' present post as senior pastor at Trinity, the largest of the UCC churches, if I understand it correctly. He follows the footsteps of the Reverend Jeremiah Wright, the former pastor of Barack and Michelle Obama, and one of America's greatest preachers and social activists. Trinity has 50 active ministries in the community and is sought out for support and in many of its efforts that impact both the African American community and the city of Chicago and nationwide. Reverend Moss has continued this great tradition in the black church progressivism at Trinity. He has worked collaboratively with a large range of community organizations, religious groups, and civic organizations to work for the betterment of the Chicago community. I note in particular the collaborative effort with the Black Star Project, a black educational project to focus on getting young black men and women through schools in the Chicago area. With the Nation of Islam and with teachers from Oglesby Elementary School and others to stop the violence that has devastated the Chicago community. Dr. Moss understands that this violence can strike at anyone, as he outlined in a very powerful letter to his teenage son recently that was published in the Huffington Post, warning and educating him about the responsibilities in the world. Reverend Moss understands the link between urban poverty, environmental racism, climate change, and the environmental crisis that we all face. Reverend Moss and Trinity congregation are developing programs to address both the environmental, community education, and economic development in the city of Chicago. Reverend Moss and Trinity UCC represent the best of the black church and prophetic tradition. And I look forward to hearing the conversation between Reverend Moss and Tom Steyer this evening.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. It is an absolute delight to be here in Oberlin and to grace this stage with Tom Steyer. This is the second time that we have done a dialogue together, and with the president of Oberlin. I told him I remember Oberlin growing up.
because I used to play hockey around here. Yes, I played ice hockey around here and as a small child, and then now they got rid of the rink. I don't know if that had anything to do with me, but we are just delighted. I'm so glad that my parents also are here today, and it's good to see you all this evening. There is great excitement across the nation about a nexus, a movement that is happening. A movement that is connecting environmentalism, mass incarceration, and a just economy. I like to call it by any means necessary, is what we need to do. And the faith community specifically has been a community that is deeply connected to the environment. I know in recent years it seems that the faith community has moved in a different direction, but the roots, whether you're talking about the Abrahamic religions or Eastern traditions or the traditional religions of the global South, that all of these traditions believe in the sacredness of this planet, the sacredness of nature, and the sacredness of human beings. And out of the African American tradition, I like to say that we have always been green. And been deeply connected to green. From 1619 to 1831, that was the green church movement in the African American community. It was actually the red, black, and green movement. Red for the blood, sweat, and tears, and black coming out of the Africanity and African religious ethos of the African tradition, and also green, recognizing the sacredness of God's planet. And why do I say that that was the green period? Because that was what was known as the invisible institution. We didn't have very many church buildings. The one building that we had was the building that we could step outside and see. That's why we said down by the riverside. That's why we talked about wade in the water. That's the recognition of the sacredness of that which God has placed in human hands. And even when you built a church, you used reclaimed wood. Many times it was liberated wood from somebody else who thought they were your owner, but you had reclaimed wood. It was an early form of the recycling movement. And so many of the earlier churches in the South, especially if you're looking at a first African or a second African, these were churches that were designed with African ingenuity. And why do I say African ingenuity? Because without an AC system, they could design churches in such a way that it would heat and cool depending upon the seasons. And these are things that we have to reclaim, especially in this day and age, and build this wonderful movement of moving together with environmentalism, mass incarceration, and just economy. And some are raising their questions like, I don't understand. How do you connect these three things? One, recognizing that the earth is sacred. Two, recognizing the human dignity of all and that moral language that comes out of the faith community of redemption and grace, giving someone mercy, or as Brian Stevenson says, just mercy. Or even moving further, when you talk about just economy, making sure that there is moral language and a morality connected to our markets, and also ethics with our economy. So how does this work together? That's a nice thing. I know somebody's saying, but if I was on the south side, I would say, well, let me break it down so you understand what I'm trying to say. How do you move these things together? Well, we figured out an idea at Trinity United Church of Christ. We desperately wanted to renovate our facility, but we wanted our architecture to connect with our theology, our prophetic theology of the belief in human dignity, and that what we do should also impact the immediate community. That not just to renovate a building and have a nice building, but have a building that speaks to what we believe in. So we marched on this idea of doing a green renovation. It took me about 6 years to even just have the conversation with the congregation, because you have people of a variety of traditions and a variety of perspective and generations. And so I remember when I announced it, I was so excited about this idea, and I was at the barbershop one day. We said, we're going to put a green roof on the church, and we're going to renovate the church, and everything, we're going to be LEED certified. And there I was at the barbershop. I overheard the barber say that there was an elderly gentleman who was from your church who was recently in here and said he's upset with that young preacher who wants to put a putting green on top of the church. So I had to do some more work and did a listening campaign and a vision casting campaign of sharing what would be the benefits if we reduce our carbon footprint. But we do not stop there. We made the decision that people working on this renovation would be returning citizens. Who are returning citizens? Some people mistakenly call them ex-cons, felons. No. You are just a returning citizen, so your rights are restored so you can have your full dignity. And to have these people working on this building. So now you have in the environmentalist movement also reducing mass incarceration. 60 million people are in some way or form or shape under the criminal justice system in America. We have moved from 150,000 in the 70s until we planted a war on poor people, a war on drugs under the Nixon administration. And now there are 2 million people. But there is a way for us to reduce this by recognizing the sacredness of the planet and the sacredness of human dignity. And by doing this, we are trying to structure not just the ministry that we are involved in, but also the building that we occupy that speaks to the theology that we believe in. Mass incarceration, environmentalism, and just economy. The just economy comes in because we had zip codes that we wanted to make sure that we hit. So we weren't just going to bring in people to the south side to do work and go home. We want to make sure that the dollars that we spend with the subcontractors, they are also in the local neighborhood. Because one of the greatest ways to reduce violence is with a job. That if you ensure that someone has a job, and the greatest way to reduce crime is not casting it as a criminal justice issue, but as a public health issue and as an economic issue, and ensure that people have home ownership. Home ownership and jobs are the greatest way to reinvigorate a community. So moving these three things together, recognizing the history that we come from that has already been green. Even our grandmothers were green. Before we even knew what green was, grandmothers knew how to make things called quilts. That's nothing but recycling. Our grandmothers knew how to make things like gumbo. That's recycling once again. Things that you were going to throw away, but put it all into a pot and mix it up, and now they serve it $20 a bowl at some restaurants. All of this is green. And the idea that if you are ill for food security, you do not go to the supermarket. You already have a garden in the back of your house. All of these are part of the green movement. And putting these things together, environmentalism, mass incarceration, and just economy. This is how we design a new America, by ensuring those who have been marginalized are a part of the economy and making sure that we take care of the planet, the only planet that we have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Moss. And now we'd like to do some questions and have a dialogue between you two, and then at some point, we'll let the audience in on the act. Tom, let me start with you. What does the NextGen economy do for the job creation in this area of the country, in the Rust Belt, and particularly in the older manufacturing cities of Ohio?
So let me go back to our mission statement, which is to act politically to prevent climate disaster and to promote prosperity for every American. If we don't go after clean energy in a way that creates jobs and creates jobs throughout our communities, we will not succeed. And so when we think about Ohio right now, Ohio has 100,000 clean energy jobs. About 80,000 of them are in energy efficiency, about 12 are in advanced transportation, and about 8 are in solar or wind. When we think about Ohio's capability for job creation in these areas, I look to California, where for the same number of people, we would have approximately 100,000 more jobs. And that is inevitably going to happen in Ohio. The question in my mind is, we're going to have to make this transition. And the question is, are we going to have those jobs be distributed throughout poor communities? If we're not, it's not going to succeed. Let me say this. When I originally got involved politically on clean energy was in 2010 in California. And one of the people I was working closely with was a guy named Kevin DeLeon, who represents one of the poorest districts in Los Angeles, California. And he came and said, Tom, If you put solar panels on the houses in my district, the houses will fall down. But if we don't get a bunch of those jobs putting solar panels up around the state, I'm not going to support you. And we, from the very beginning, have said the jobs have got to be well paid, they've got to be well distributed. We have to make sure that people who need jobs, that this is an answer for the injustice that we're seeing in our state and around the United States economically and racially. That this is an answer for job creation for people who need jobs and need good paying jobs to support their family in. So when you ask how is it going to work in Ohio, it is only going to work if we create these jobs and distribute them fairly and pay them fairly. And if we do that, we will have people who will fight for a new economy desperately. And they will be the answer for the clean economy, will be the answer for justice economically, and the group of people who will fight together will be much more than 50% of America.
Reverend Moss, how do you see the clean energy economy succeeding for people in the south side of Chicago? What's actually happening there and what needs to happen?
Well, there are several amazing groups. One is with us tonight. Faith and Place is in the house, doing tremendous work, about 126 congregations, I believe, throughout the Chicagoland area that they work with. We are part of the coalition that they are doing and doing a tremendous, tremendous job. Another project that we are currently working on is with a group out of New York entitled Block Energy. Block Energy is attempting to go to houses, faith communities, and to do retrofitting. But we're coming in as a coalition to do retrofitting. Because what we want to do is to leverage the city of Chicago to do retrofitting off of every public building. So we're trying to do it as coming together as faith communities, utilizing the same local returning citizen format, and then presenting to the city of Chicago to say that we did this as a faith community. Do you have enough faith in your community to do what we have done? And so that's one of the projects that's happening in Chicago. Another that's happening is in and around food security. There are 1,026 empty lots in Inglewood that has the highest level of violence. One of the projects is to reclaim these spaces for community gardens. Community gardens have shown to reduce violence. One is because people come together and they build community. Second thing is people get nosy with each other when they build community garden. What are you doing by my tomatoes? What are you doing? What are you doing? So all of a sudden you end up creating a type of community watch centered around tomatoes and greens. Simple little things as this. But then you're also dealing with the food insecurity issues and the food deserts and food swamps. Children then begin to eat food that is healthy. When they eat food that's healthy, they no longer are bouncing off the walls from the high sugar content that they are normally eating, which then causes many teachers who are already overburdened to say, I'm sending you to the office or somewhere else, or for a doctor to make a recommendation that's misdiagnosed as someone who may be ADHD sometimes. That happens in urban areas. So these simple things such as this, and along with also putting together a coalition of people who will do retrofitting and utilize alternative fuel sources, are some of the things that we're working on in Chicago. Wow. So we hope to be a green city in the near future.
Well, I think you've already answered part of my next question, but I'm going to throw it to both of you, which is what is the role of anchor institutions like an Oberlin College or a Stanford University or Trinity UCC in leading efforts to mitigate climate change in ways that will benefit everyone? Tom, I don't know if you want to start on that.
So anchor institutions. You know, one of the things that's happened in the United States to our disservice is that the framework for thinking of some of our most important issues has been wrong. And when you think about climate and energy, it's really important that the thought leaders, the people who set the intellectual framework for how we think, actually do lead and come up and live the way. I mean, I was looking at the hotel I'm staying in, which is as the Reverend said, it's a physical manifestation of values and mission. So when you think about where we're going, it is really important that the people who have the credibility and who have the capability of leading us intellectually actually lead. And so I'll make, to me, the greatest change that we had intellectually was when we decided that government was something imposed on us that we should get rid of, that somehow we were going to move back to the market, that was the source of not only efficiency, but justice. And I can think of nothing more true, more false. If you think about what Ronald Reagan said, he said, the scariest words in the English language are, we're from the government and we're here to help. And everyone believed that. But the government, our elected officials who represent our common interest to try and serve us all in the most just way possible. And it is important for our lead institutions to embody the values of the United States and of our communities so that when we look at problems, we look at them with the right framework. Because if that doesn't happen, we will make terrible decisions. And honestly, it will be shirking the responsibility of leading great institutions.
And I would simply add the importance of coalition building and partnerships. An institution such as Oberlin with so many talented students who do not have the traditional ceiling on their creativity as many other adults do. And to release them into the world, to look at the world in a very unique way and allow them to partner with the community, amazing things happen. So we are currently working with the Illinois Institute of Technology. And so we purchased 27 acres of land about 10 years ago, 5 of which will be an urban farm. We're planning to do a green from the ground up community. It's one of the first times that a faith community is attempting a $126 million investment on the south side of Chicago. And that's what we're attempting to do. That will have housing. We'll also have entrepreneurship, a food hub, athletic facility, non-traditional athletics. There'll be no football or basketball. It'll be a lot of track and volleyball, soccer, lacrosse, whatever you want to get to Oberlin and come and spend time. And also at the largest urban farm in Chicago of 5 acres, right next to what is called the West Pullman area. But it was the students at the Illinois Institute of Technology who took the framework. And as older adults, we have ceilings. They didn't have the ceiling. They said, well, have you thought about this? What about a food hub? Well, you want to conserve energy on your athletic facility. Instead of going up, go down, and then put a green roof on top. Then you have additional acreage to grow food for the community. Why don't you put a food hub here that then is a transportation hub for the south side? So they came up with some amazing ideas because they were released into the community. And I believe that that is the kind of partnership. If we want to see transformation in our community, we have to release the most talented people to work with individuals who have been in the community for years.
Well, that was wonderful. The election season is upon us, and I'm wondering, what salience do opportunities in the clean energy economy factor in the current election campaign, and how do you see this surfacing as a political issue or not in the current campaign? Tom?
So let me talk about that in 2 separate ways. One of the things that we're doing is we are on hundreds of college campuses, and we're doing a big online program specifically to people under the age of 30. So we know for these people, this is the #1 polling issue in the United States. So from our standpoint, it is partly to talk about them, to make sure they understand where the candidates stand on the issue, to make sure they understand the substantial, gross differences, and to make sure they understand how important their vote is. But more than that, we see this issue as a justice issue connected to all the other justice issues. So we might cut it slightly differently from Reverend Moss, but let me explain how we do it. We would go with environmental justice, that in the United States of America, whether you get to breathe clean air and drink clean water is very dependent on who you are and where you live and how rich you are. So if you think about Flint, Michigan,
Right.
there are a lot of Flint, Michigans in California. We have 3.3 million people with asthma. They're overwhelmingly working class people of color. That's where people put The plants, that's where people put the roads with the big diesel trucks. We think about the economic justice issues. Those are issues absolutely connected with everything that we're doing. We cannot separate these issues. We don't want to separate these issues. We have to address them together. So when we think about 2016 elections, what is the number one, the two words I would come up with, which absolutely echo what the Reverend has been saying, are justice and coalition. There's a reason people are paying attention to economic justice this year, because we see economic injustice. There's a reason why people are paying attention to environmental justice, because we see environmental injustice. And there's a reason people are paying attention to racial justice this year, because we are seeing on these videos racial injustice. So when we think about how we're going to approach them, we will either approach these all together in coalition, or we will fail. And that is what 2016 says to me, and that's why these issues are tied, and they're winning issues. Because the people of the United States can see it, that's what they care about, we can see the passion, and it's time to make a change in how we think about things.
We're going to have to change the way that we talk about environmentalism and how we build our coalitions. One of the groups that we are missing, that we assume will not be for these quote-unquote issues, are many people that are in the South who normally would vote, say, to the right. But if you talk to people who fish and hunt, they do want clean water to be able to fish. They do want protected land so that they can hunt. That there is a way to build a coalition with people we traditionally feel will not be a part of this coalition. The other thing is that we also have to begin to tell the truth. The idea that we are still having conversations, that it is actually allowed to be brought up on television with no one, chastising you for saying that, I disagree with climate change. That has got to be one of the foolish things I've ever heard in my life. The fact that we have the information, we know what is happening, and climate change, I put it in a form of genocide. That if we allow the planet to increase in terms of temperature, we're talking about the cultural genocide of people who live on coasts and islands across the world. Do we want to lose that group of people? This is a major issue for those in the global South, not just the United States. We have to think about this issue in a very different way and build coalitions and not let pundits frame how we talk about the planet.
All right, I'm going to throw out one more question, and then I'm going to give it to the audience. So please be thinking of questions that you might ask our panelists. It's January 2017. We will have a new president. What advice do you have for that person? We'll start with you, Reverend Moss.
I would say, one, build the coalition. Well, let me say, when she becomes president, when she becomes president, building the coalitions on the left become important. Many millennials are disaffected in this particular election because of the way that both parties operate. When legislation goes forward, there's always compromise, but the level of compromising has been so destructive. There has to be strong coalition on the left to ensure that there is moral language that is raised in all policy discussions. This is what the political community is missing. We need moral language. We need to talk about human worth and human dignity. We need to talk about our planet in moral language to ensure, I don't know, maybe somebody else is flying to Mars. I'm not. So I want to make sure that where I live, the air that I breathe, and that I am preparing a planet that will be cared for a generation that has not yet been born. That's my gift to my yet-to-be-born grandchildren. that they have space to be able to grow, play, imagine, and be creative.
So I think we should be realistic about 2017 and Washington, D.C., because I completely agree with Reverend Moss. We are going to have a female president for the first time. But I think it's very unlikely that either party will have 60 votes in the Senate and control of the House. So the ability, what we have seen in Washington, D.C. is legislative dysfunction, and we've seen it consistently. So we're going to have a new president who is going to have a Congress which, with a high degree of probability, is going to be unwilling or unable to confront some of, or most of, or all of our most important issues. So her task, she's going to have some administrative things that she can do, including the obviously incredibly important one of choosing Supreme Court justices. But the question that the Reverend Moss brings up to me is going to be the most important one, because that dysfunction will end. It will end because the American people will end it. But while it continues, she is going to have to reframe our questions, use new language, explain the world differently so that we can answer the problems that we have now. And that is something that can be done. That is something that will happen and will end our dysfunction faster in Congress when the American people see the world in the 21st century. One of the big problems I think we have in 2016 is we have ideas from the 1930s and ideas from the 1980s. We're in a different century. It's time for us to see a brighter future, to see not just our problems, but that our solutions will give us a better world the way we always have. And when people can see that, they'll fight for it. And that's when we'll end our dysfunction, and that's a big job for the president.
All right. Questions from the audience. It's hard for me to see people, but raise your hand and I will call on you. It's not an Oberlin audience that doesn't have questions. Is that Hunter? Yes, please.
Tom, role of regenerative agriculture in solving the climate crisis and what you and Kat are doing.
So we tend to think about climate strictly in terms of industry, heating, and transportation. And they all are really important, as we all know. But we don't see it in terms of the greenhouse gases created by agriculture or the possibility of sequestering carbon through agriculture. And both are important. So the fact of the matter is, the way that we raise crops, the way that we raise animals, how we treat the land, is both something that creates a lot of our greenhouse gases and can also solve a lot of our problems. The amount of carbon in the soil in the United States is a fraction of what it was when Europeans first arrived here. We can put carbon back into the soil and completely change the arithmetic with different grazing patterns, with different ways of raising animals, and with different ways of raising crops. And when we do that, we are going to have to find ways that are not less painful, that are not neutral. We're going to have to figure out ways to be positive in this. And this is one of the ways where we have the most possibility. And for our sins, my wife and I are trying to figure out part of that out in California. Great.
Okay, I will call on you, Tony, but let's make it short.
Oh, it's short. To Reverend Moss, do you work with Habitat for Humanity in your rehabilitation? And I give you a little information. When I was a supervisor at our prisons east of town here in Grafton, we had small community service groups that went out into the community, and they worked with Habitat, and when they were released, they basically had made a transition and were able to work themselves right back into the Cleveland economy.
To answer your question, yes, we do. We do have a relationship with Habitat for Humanity, and we work with them. They do tremendous work, and we're glad to have that coalition.
All right. The person in, oh my goodness, is there a student? Let's go for the person in the back. I can't tell who that is, but the person in the back, yes, you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Nicole, and I go to Lorraine Community College, and I'm in their Sustainable Agriculture program, a program that a year ago I didn't know existed, but has been an amazing opportunity to work hands-on, learning information that I want to study about permaculture and the future of farming and how to farm sustainably for our future. And I was wondering if in Chicago and around the different places that you guys have seen, if there are more technical, 2-year, practical kinds of programs that kind of go along with this high-level college and people coming out of the criminal cycle back into society. But I was wondering if you've seen a lot of these technical types of programs.
That's great.
That's a great question. Chicago is slowly moving in that direction. Chicago is an industrial city, the city with big shoulders, as Saul Bellow stated, and we are still trying to move in the direction of recognizing that there is not just the 1920s economy, which Chicago was built on, and we're attempting to move into the 21st century in terms of its structure and development.
You want me to talk about agriculture?
If you want.
Let me say, if you were asking questions about agricultural programs in the United States, about progressive agricultural programs with a climate focus, there are some really terrific ones, including one at Wisconsin, which is run by a woman named Molly Johns, which is absolutely fantastic. But there is a community of people who are looking at these problems very directly, and they're hooked up with some of the big agricultural companies, but a lot of the best thinking is being done in universities around the United States. And if you stay afterwards, I'll give you their numbers.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Great question. Yes. Yes. In the middle.
Hi, my name's Matt Roberts. This is interesting. This is a question for Tom and NextGen in general. NextGen's obviously a politically focused organization, and I'm curious, post-election, what NextGen Climate's moves are.
So that is a great question. And I think it's going to be hard to answer, and let me explain why. You know, we don't know what is going to happen on November 8th. I have some opinions, and I can read polls as well as everybody else and kind of try and figure out which way the momentum's moving. But the fact of the matter is, we don't know where, you know, who's going to be elected in the composition of the government, either at the federal level or in the different states. So the real question that we're going to ask on November 9th is, how can we actually get an effective reaction to our climate challenge? Because at some point, a lot of times in politics, the question is, how can we elect people from our party? And it seems people expect kind of a reversion to the mean, so it's kind of a push and pull, and it goes back and forth. That's not going to work for us. That is not going to work for us. It is not going to work for us to push and pull and kind of do a little better or a little bit worse. We actually need to attack this problem, and I think that's true of the number of justice-related issues. We can't afford to wait until we have a lay-down hand with a group of progressive politicians. So the question we're going to ask on November 9th is, given what we see, what is the way that we're actually going to get urgent movement? And I think that that's a really open question. I have some ideas, but until we see the actual landscape, it's going to be impossible to know. I promise we will be going as hard on November 9th as we're going on November 8th.
Is that Jeff Hansen? It is. Speak.
I think I safely speak on behalf of everyone. Thank you all for your time tonight. This was amazing. We've heard you speak about coalition building. We've heard you speak about environmental and social justice. You're back on this stage in 10 years. It's 2027. How do you define success for yourselves and your movements 10 years from now? What do you want to be able to say to yourselves and to us?
cutting the mass incarceration population by 50%. Number two, increasing housing in underserved communities by 60%. A reduction in Chicago's gun-related violence by another 50%. And to place it in above any other large major city in the United States. The other piece would be in Chicago, we have one of the largest urban solar farms. We are in conversation with ComEd, had a really nice conversation with them. We said they have this large urban solar farm, but it does not power any of the houses in the area where it's located. They send the power all the way to another city, then they send the power back to the houses. And so we're in negotiation with ComEd that provides the infrastructure for the power to create urban solar hubs where you take 12 houses. You put those 12 houses together, they have their solar panels, and they become a cluster. But they also become a cluster where they get to vote on who will be the subcontractor to install everything in that community. And that then places community control as we start talking about the green economy. The other piece connected to it is the educational piece. I said to ComEd, this is great that you have this here, but you now have an opportunity to educate an entire new generation of young people who will get degrees in environmentalism or in different technical degrees in engineering. Open this area up, not just for a walkthrough tour, but to share how you can go into a particular career. And so in 10 years from now, I hope that the South Side of Chicago will be known for that. There is great work happening in Chicago beyond what you hear on the headlines.
So let me take a slightly different tack, because I think that's a very good description of outcomes. But I want to give you a different measure of what I think success would be. And I think back to the other great challenges that my parents or I've observed, and let me just choose two huge national challenges for the United States, which would be World War II and the Civil Rights Movement. So I remember going to northern Minnesota with my parents, and my father was, I think probably about 22 in 1941. So all of his friends were of an age to have participated, male friends were of an age to have participated in World War II. And when they met each other, they always asked each other what they'd done. And there was an implicit statement that something important had to happen, and you had to have participated in a meaningful way. And I also have one of my best friends is a guy from Orange, New Jersey, who's African American. He told me that during the Civil Rights Movement, everybody checked everybody else. Are you showing up? Are you doing the work? Are you standing out for what's right? So to me, in 10 years, success will be when you meet your best friends, you just check to see if they were part of the movement. Did they stand up for justice in the United States? Did they stand up for a new way of looking? And that will be an implicit, quiet way of measuring each other. So for instance, and I hesitate to do this, but let me just say, two of my really good friends are here. One of them is the guy who developed the hotel where we had dinner, and the other one teaches in a community college in Cleveland. So we can all contribute in this movement in our own ways, but we have to contribute. And if we do, that will be success for us, because we will make it happen.
Well, I think we've had a wonderful evening. Please join me in thanking Tom Steyer and Reverend Moss for their inspirational words.